Hi guys, I want to share with us today like an introduction really to creation care, a theology of creation care. Many of us have got a theology of creation care that simply says, well, it's good to look after the planet, isn't it? Because we're going to pass it to the next generation. Therefore, it's a good thing to do. Therefore, we should think about recycling, reclaiming, living lightly, living simply, consuming less. We should do all of that because it's good for the next generation. Actually, that's good. It's a good argument, but that's not a good theology for creation care at all. In fact, it's a pretty weak one. The pandemic has given us an opportunity to rethink, reimagine, reshape for the future. We don't have to go back to the ways that we did things before. We can look forward and do things better. The reality is it's more likely that we won't. The consumeristic society of which we are based upon is more likely to pull us back to the old ways of doing things, about consuming and consumption and sale and greed. It's more likely to take us in that direction. Unless we choose to go in another direction, the pandemic has made us realize that we are more connected than we ever really imagined. A virus can make its way from one country to another country, to another country, to a continent, to a country, to here. Like, we've realized that it's so easy for a virus to move around. We are more connected globally than we have ever been. We can transmit things around almost like lightning speed. It takes one plane to carry a virus from one country to another, and then we have a pandemic. We are more connected than we have really imagined. So let's just look at a bit of theology of creation care for a moment. To do this, we have to go back to Genesis. See, in Genesis, God creates us in his image. He puts us in the Garden of Eden, man and woman, made in his likeness. The word likeness there is more about our character and our nature than our physical looks. But God's put us in a garden, and we are created in his image. And the idea was that we would walk with him in the cool of the day. We'd have this intimate relationship with God wandering around in the garden. And then in Genesis chapter 2, I'm just going to read verse 15, just one verse. The Lord God, Yahweh, took the humankind. Okay, the Lord God took humankind and put them in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So God creates Adam and Eve, puts us in the garden, and that placing in the garden has a purpose attached to it. We weren't just to treat the garden as if it was a playground, and that at the end of the day somebody would come along and pick up all the pieces. It isn't that we would enjoy the garden and then somebody else would come and garden it for us. It says that God put us in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And I think so. Our purposes in the garden are to be the gardeners. We're not to be the ones that come and enjoy the garden and then walk away, and a gardener comes and deals with the broken fence posts, the plants that need watering, the grass that needs cutting, the animals that live in the garden that need caring for. It wasn't somebody else's job. He'd put us in the garden as the gardeners. Like, it's our role to care for that garden. And there's two words that we have here used in Genesis 2, which is super important. The first one is the word work, and the other one is care. So I'm just going to look at the word work for a moment. The word work here in the Hebrew is the word ovad, which is O-V-D, ovad. And it can be translated as to work it, to serve it. The idea of being a servant, coming and giving to its needs. We were in the garden to be there to serve the needs of the garden. It's not just the garden is there for us to enjoy, yeah, but it's also that we are there to serve the needs of the garden. So we are here to serve the needs of the planet. What the planet needs to thrive, we are here to serve it. I also like the word dress. Ovad can be translated as work, serve, and dress. The King James Bible translates it as to dress it. I like the idea of dressing. When my kids were small, I had the pleasure and privilege of choosing what they were going to wear. and we would go in. See, when I say when they're small, they're teenagers now. They won't have any conversation over what they should wear. But I could choose, what clothing they went on, what we did with their hair, how we made them look. So this idea is we're in the garden to work it, to serve it, but also to dress it. We're there to make it look beautiful. It's our job to tend it in such a way that it brings about beauty in that garden. So we are there to intimately have a relationship with the garden, to care for it, to serve it, and to dress it. It's our choice how we make that grow. As the gardener, we get to choose what that looks like, what's in season, what's out of season, that whole kind of thing. So it's this idea of our job is to serve it, not it serve us. Which is interesting because actually the way we consume creation, we consume its energies, we consume its food, and we become the consumers of a planet. We have a consumer mentality, but actually our role as human beings are placed in the garden to care for and tend the creation. That's our job. So then let's go on. So it says that they were put in the garden in to work it and take care of it. Now the word care here in the Hebrew is the word Shomr, Shomr, Shomr. And this is translated a whole ton of different ways. To keep it, to preserve it, to protect it, to watch it, and one of my favourites, to bring justice for it. So the King James Bible translates this phrase as we were put in the garden to dress it and keep it. To dress it and keep it. Now this word Shomr is interesting because it doesn't actually appear anywhere else in the Bible, as far as I can see, and many other scholars would say it's just not there. We don't see this word Shomr in this form anywhere else in the Bible. So how do we know how to translate that word, Chris? Well, it's used in other Hebrew texts. So other Hebrew writings that exist use this word. So how do they use that word, Chris? Well, they use that word, and it seems to only really be attached to one other idea. That other idea is child care or child rearing or parenting. So the word Shomr is used in terms of the relationship between a mother and a baby. So we're put in the garden to take care of it and to look after it in the same way a mother looks after a child. Let's just think about this for a moment. It's the mum's job. Well, we'd say mum and dad's job, but you get the point. It's the mum's job to feed the child and care for its feeding needs. It's the mum's job to make sure that that child has adequate health care. It's the mum's job to make sure that child has adequate clothing and a secure environment where it's safe. Now, child was being looked after by somebody, and that somebody puts the child in the kitchen and says, "There you go, you're in your bouncer. Here's a can of baked beans and a tin opener. Sort yourself out." You'd say, "Well, that's not caring for the child. That's actually neglect." What happens if somebody came in that room and abused that child? The child can't speak out for itself. The child can't say, "Hang on, I've just been abused." The child needs somebody else to say, "Hang on, this needs to go to court because what has just happened here is abuse. This is not acceptable." So to Shomr a child, to care for a child, is to seek justice for the child when the unjust thing has happened to that child. And that is exactly what we are called to be as partners with God in the garden. We are to care for the needs of creation. We're there to bring justice for creation when it's abused by an abuser. And we are to look after its deepest needs. That's our job. We are to care for the planet the same way a mother cares for a child, in the same way a child can't care for itself, the planet can't care for itself. Therefore, we are there as gardeners for the planet. And that shift totally is going to change the way that we care for the planet. Now, what's interesting is that call happens before the fall of man, before sin enters the world. We are called to this behavior. Okay? So when Jesus dies on the cross, he doesn't die just to save us from our sin. Jesus dies to save us from our sin and bring us back to the original purpose. Christians should be the most passionate about creation care, because when Jesus dies for us on the cross, he does so to bring us back to the original partnership that we were meant to have with God as gardeners of creation. That's what we're invited into. So a good, robust care for the planet, or good, robust theology of creation care, would say that we are in the garden for the purposes of caring for the planet, not we're here for the planet. No, the planet's here for us. So just a couple of other thoughts. I've had lots of arguments with friends over the years about cleaning. And some people will say, well, what I like to do is leave it as long as I can. And then when it's an absolute disgrace and it's been gone for months, then I'll do a deep clean. I like to do a deep clean. And I think that's how many of us behave towards the planet. I actually don't think it's wise. It's not wise to leave things to get so bad that you have to do a deep clean. Actually, I think there's major issues. If we think about what's actually going on in the psychology of somebody who would say that, and I apologize if that's you, but that kind of psychology places you at the center of the universe, and the home orientates around you. And with the planet, we are not there to let it get really bad and then suddenly run around to try and... This idea of regularly caring for something means that we take responsibility for this call in our lives to care for what God has given us. So when it comes to our homes, we should be cleaning our homes regularly because we're caring for the thing that God has given us to care for. So this idea of leave it to the last minute, and when it's really bad, I just have to ask a question over what that says about somebody. I'm the center of the world, and the world orientates around me, and therefore I will not care for everything else. Whereas we need to flip it round, saying actually creation and God is the heart of our faith, what God has given us, and it's our job to tend and care for this thing that God has given us as an act of worship. And it's really interesting. Those who believe Seventh-day creationism, like staunch Seventh-day creationists, are often the worst in caring for the planet. They almost behave as if, well, God created the world in 7 days. Like they have this real profound sense of the Seventh-day creationism, whilst at the same time a real low theology of creation care. And it's like, surely they shouldn't be at odds with each other. And often what goes along with Seventh-day creationism is this idea of mass evacuation. So God's given us a planet, created it in 7 days. We're here for a period of time. They often say the phrase, this is not my home, I'm just passing on through. So I'm just a renter of the property, and one day I'm just going to get out of here to mass evacuation, so it doesn't matter what we do to the planet. That's atrocious theology. In fact, if you read the book of Revelation, it says that heaven will come to earth and that the created order will be redeemed. So this does seem to be our home, and we're not just passing on through. There's something about this place that has a longer lifespan than just the time of which we have got our feet on the ground. So if you're a Seventh-day creationist, or you believe that God created not in 7 days, but 7 phases or 7 periods of time, however you understand that passage, we have to also understand that God's placed us in the garden to tend, dress, and care it. Whatever period of time it took to create, God's placed us here as gardeners for it, and one day he will come and partner with us in it. God coming to earth to do his part in the redemption of all things. So that's kind of where I would start when it comes to creation care. I'd love you to look at that passage from Genesis chapter 2, verse 14, 15, 16. What do you make of that passage? How do you care for the planet? Have you thought about the planet and how that's an actual act of worship? We care for creation as an act of worship to the one that created us and the planet. Have you ever thought about that? How would you like to see society change post-pandemic so we engage with creation care in a more profound, caring way? How would you like to do that? It's important to know, how are we engaging with this as a church? We've engaged with it around the company that we buy our electricity from. We want to make sure it's more and more sustainable. We've been moving to LED light sources, trying to get rid of traditional bulbs so we consume less energy. We think quite carefully about when we put the heating on, so it's not just on randomly for hours, but that actually only goes on purposefully when we need it. So there's lots of things we're doing. Recycling. In fact, direct to recycling bin is often packed full of recycling. So we're thinking about all of these things when it comes to the way that we behave as a church. And I'd love to invite you to think about how you might engage with this stuff personally as well, and how you might champion it in your workplace, but also how we might change society and how we consume things in the future. So friends, have fun with that. Have a great discussion, and I'd love to hear some of your feedback.